Spirit of the river, ancient forgiver, Spirit of the land, hold me in your hand. Spirit of the wind, carry me back to the sea. With the Mississippi River just to the west and the Illinois River to the east, this area has a long connection to the Caribbean. You don't often think about pirates here in northwestern Illinois, but we have a history of pirates. Actually, Jean Lafitte, one of the most famous pirates from New Orleans, his third wife, that eventually became his widow, when he passed, she showed up in Alton, Illinois, where the Illinois River joins the Mississippi, and she lived quite luxuriously for a number of years, and no one knows where the money came from. But I bet you could guess. Pirates' gold. And if you talk to the Peoria Historical Society, people from Peoria actually founded New Orleans and Chicago. New Orleans was founded by René Robert Cavalier Sieur de La Salle, who first built Fort Crèvecoeur in Peoria, and then headed on down the Mississippi, planted a 20-foot tall cross, and claimed the entire drainage of the Mississippi River for King Louis, because I say so, it is mine, yes? And King Louis gave him a letter of marque, a royal seal, that meant every fur-bearing mammal, think about that, every fur-bearing mammal on every creek and tributary of the Mississippi. So your pelt belongs to La Salle, your pelt belongs to La Salle, your pelt belongs to La Salle. You can keep yours, it's too short. They belong to La Salle because the king said so. Then a French Creole African-American born in Haiti in the Caribbean came to visit New Orleans and was captured and sold into slavery. But when a Jesuit priest found out that he was fluent in several languages, including Greek and Latin and Hebrew, and could translate the holy word, this Jesuit priest helped him to escape. And he headed up the Mississippi, up the Illinois, and he lived in what is now downtown Peoria for a number of years. He owned 400 acres of what is now downtown Peoria. He married a Potawatomi woman whose name translates to swift deer, and then he headed further up the Illinois, and he created a fur trading post on the shore of Lac Michigamme. He called it Chicago. He sold his fur trading outpost to the Kinseys. His name was Baptiste. So you can see this area has a long connection to the Caribbean. But there's one story in particular I'd like to share this evening that involved an herbalist who had a shop in downtown Peoria. If you talk to the Peoria Historical Society, they'll show you photographs. That's how I learned this story. In this herbalist shop, hanging in the window, he had shrunken heads. I've seen the pictures. He had huge jars of all kinds of strange beasts from the depths of the sea that he had bought from New Orleans. He was white, but he had studied the African traditions. He had a long black braid down the middle of his back, a long black beard with one white stripe. And he often ran his fingers through that beard, stroking that stripe so it looked like a lightning bolt coming from his chin. And he was an herbalist, apothecary, pharmacist. I think today you'd call his shop Walgreens. But he was just as quick to curse you as he was to cure you if you didn't pay your bills on time. And then one day, on the front counter, right next to the cash register, there showed up this huge green glass jar, stoppered tight, and sealed with red wax. The cork was more like a slice of a tree. But inside that dark green glass jar, filled with a murky fluid, if you looked carefully, you might see the swish of a tail or the face of a man. And if he caught you staring, it's a merman! A merman! I got it from the sea! And you would tremble as you walked out of the shop. Well, one day, an older woman who lived on the south side of town, she had been born in Africa, caught and sold into slavery. But unlike the Underground Railroad, she did not escape in the middle of the night. She just walked away in the middle of the day. She wasn't going to take it. And she moved north. She claimed her freedom. And she, too, was an herbalist for her neighbors on the south side of town. And though she didn't like the old man, he sometimes had ingredients that she needed for her medicines and potions. And when this old African woman came into the shop and she saw the big green glass jar on the front counter, she said, "The merfolk, they got a way of caring for their own. If you knew what was good for you, you'd be turning them loose." "If you knew what was good for you, you'd be minding your own business." "I am minding my own business." And she turned and walked out of the shop. She raised her hands to the sky and she said one word, "Yamaya," the goddess of the sea. And in that moment, the clear blue sky began to fill with clouds. Within a matter of moments, huge black thunderheads began to appear. And it began to rain. Bolts of lightning and roar of thunder. The heavens began to pour. Now, in that shop, in the back room, there lived a young man. He was the apprentice to the apothecary. He was studying the healing ways. And sometimes at night, when that boy was sleeping, you see, the same time that big green glass jar showed up on the front counter, another one very much like it showed up on the top shelf in the back counter. And sometimes at night, that boy would wake up. He slept on a cot in the back of the shop. And he swore he heard a woman's voice, high and plaintive, singing, "Spirit of the ocean, depths of emotion, spirit of the sea, set my soul free. Spirit of the wind, carry me back to the sea." But when the boy woke up and he rubbed his eyes, wondering, was it a dream? Was it real? He headed towards where he thought the song was coming from, that green glass jar, but the singing would stop. And sometimes the old man who ran the shop, he would say to the boy, "What's the store? I got business to attend to." And he slipped into the back room and the boy heard the door lock. He heard a ladder scuttle across the floor. He heard splashing sounds. And then the old man came out stroking his beard with a wild grin on his face. And there was always water on the floor when the boy went back to clean up. But when it started to rain, when that storm built up its intensity, that night the boy heard a different song. It wasn't so plaintive as it was angry and determined. "Spirit of the rain, wash away my pain. Spirit of the storm, help me be reborn. Spirit of the wind, carry me back to the sea." And the old African woman, she went around town spreading a rumor. "You know, if he knew what was good for him, he'd be turning them loose. The merfolk, they got a way of caring for their own. You know, if he knew what was good for him, he'd be turning them loose. The merfolk, they got a way of caring for their own." But the rain never ceased. For 4 days and 4 nights, the heavens poured. The river began to rise. Even people who lived up on the bluff found their basements filled with water, and a foul stench began to pervade over all. And you know how it is when you haven't slept in 4 days? In the middle of the night, a bolt of lightning, a roar of thunder, and people were on edge. And that rumor, the merfolk, they got a way of caring for their own. On the 4th day, something seemed to snap, and people began to march down the hill towards the apothecary shop. And as a small mob began to gather, they began to chant, "Turn them loose, turn them loose." More joined in. "Turn them loose, turn them loose." Everyone, "Turn them loose, turn them loose." Louder, "Turn them loose, turn them loose." Now when the old man heard the shouting, he gazed out and he saw this mob coming towards his shop. He said to the boy, "The green glass jar on the top shelf, guard it with your life." And he took the green glass jar off the front shelf after he had locked the door. And he carried the green glass jar upstairs where he lived in an apartment above his shop. And as the mob outside was chanting 2 more times, "Turn them loose, turn them loose," the old man opened the window of his shop, and somebody with a good arm and an even better aim hurled a stone and it shattered the glass of the jar that he held. But as soon as the contents began to empty the floor, in one hand he snatched up the head of a monkey, and in his other hand a knife cut a string, and he held the tail of a fish. "It's a fake! It's a fake! Go home! There's nothing for you here! Go! Go!" But that did not appease the crowd. The mob mentality snapped, and they stormed the shop. They began to bang on the front door as the old man pushed heavy furniture in front of the door and windows. The boy in the back room heard them shatter the glass and spill into the shop. He didn't know what to do. He already moved the ladder over close, and he pulled the green jar off the top shelf. He heard them flood into the store and bang on the back door. He opened the back window, and he stepped out to the street below, the jar in his hands. Somebody saw him. "He's running towards the river! Towards the river!" And the mob surged around the shop. As the boy ran out onto the wharf, the crowd surged onto the wharf, and the boy, he didn't know what to do. He opened the jar. He dumped the contents in the river and tossed the jar. And just then, the herbalist burst through the crowd. "No! No! Don't let her go! Don't let her go!" And he dove into the river after. And in that moment, a flash flood came streaming down the river. Somebody grabbed the boy off the dock as the old man, the jar, and its contents were washed away. And for the first time in 4 days, the sun came out. And the mob came to their senses. They looked at each other as if, "What are you doing? What am I doing here?" And the mob dispersed. And nobody talked about it. People just wandered home. And nobody talked about it. The young man took over the shop. He'd been studying with the old man for years, and the old man was drowned and gone. And he became a very good herbalist. And he was twice as likely to cure you as he was to curse you. And he was well respected in the community. And then one day, maybe 10 years later, instead of a flood, the river was a drought. The river was lower than anyone had ever seen it. And the now young man was walking along the shore of the river on the floodplain where usually it's underwater. And there in the mud, he saw the big green glass jar, and it was stopper tight. And inside, swishing, he thought he saw a long black beard with one gray stripe. The mermaid's revenge.